Today we'll talk about street stuff, and I have noticed that I get more response from subscribers and viewers alike if we talk more of a street-oriented subjects rather than the all-out racing tech out there. And I see it, I hear it, and I'll split it more street-oriented, and sometimes we'll go hardcore racing tech for some of you guys so you don't feel left out. Okay, but today we will be talking about Ford intake manifold for the street, and what I want to look at here is give some insight, especially with the Edelbrocks. Wyatt, another company, has similar offerings, perhaps just as good. But Edelbrock has been active at the racetrack and supporting contingencies and all that. So that being said, if they support the racers and the racetracks, we'll support the products. Anyway, here we are. Now, this is a 302 Ford, stock compression, 9-to-1. And that's what we're going to be talking about, because that's what most of the guys out there are running. Like in the previous videos, I said that people tend to under compression their engine. 9-to-1, it's too low. But that being said, it hasn't really reached many people that you can run substantially a lot higher compression than that on pump gas, especially if your car's light. Now, as an example, here we have 9-to-1, and most people have that combination. Crate motor, cast iron head. This one has got AFRs, but let's just say this is a basic stock motor, 9-to-1, stock heads, unported. What intake do you wisely choose? Okay, so here is what I recommend. The Edelbrock Performer manifold. Good quality, made in USA, that's important. Now, this one here, when you bolt it on a stock RHO block, HO block, it works great. With a mild camshaft, street camshaft, under 500 lift, 480, whatever. Run a 600 CFM carburetor, works great. Okay, so now, when you try to step it up, okay, there are such things as porting, of course, porting the heads and all that. If you go from stock with a mildly ported head, E7 casting, 351 Windsor, this manifold still works. With a 600 carburetor. Perfect. 1850 vacuum secondary, very streetable. It won't suck up a lot of gasoline, especially at today's prices, and it'll work great. Give you response, decent mileage, overall drivability would be great. Now, if you decide to port the head and put a mild camshaft in there, that would still work real good. What options you can do to get a little bit more power out of this thing is to add a spacer. Okay, when you add a spacer like so and put your 1850 carburetor in there with your mildly ported factory heads, you will gain some power. A lot of these things are designed with hood clearance issues, and a lot of them would recommend that you use a 1-inch spacer. Now, it's up to you to run a 1-inch open spacer like so, or a 4-hole type. I don't have a 1-inch, but this is a little bit, you can stack 2 of these things. Now, when you use this, you effectively extend the carburetor up and make the runners longer, and that'll boost your response, your torque on the low and mid-range RPM speeds. Now, when you do that, experiment at the track if you want to, because this one will give you a lot of response, the 4-hole spacer. This one will give you mid-range. All right, so it's up to you to choose wisely which one you feel is correct. And then if you have no idea, go to the racetrack, or if you know somebody that has done it and done it correctly, sure, why not? Now, another point to contend with, if you want a little bit more power out of the street manifold, is this. You have the manifold, and right here is your exhaust crossover, and what it does is heat up the manifold for a quick warm-up. It's great for and that's why it's given a lot of streetability, because they warm up easily, especially with a properly adjusted choke. But like anything, nothing's for free. You will, when you've been driving around for a while, this exhaust heat on the bottom of the manifold will cost you some power, perhaps 9, 10, or maybe 12 horsepower. How do you fix it, or how do you help it? One thing is the manifold gaskets that is used or adapted is like the Velcro with the heat. Okay, here's the stock manifold gasket right here. Okay, if you look closely, there's a hole in that part right there. It allows the exhaust heat to come in and hit the bottom of the manifold for warm-up issues and stuff, drivability when it's cold. Now, when you use the Hypo Velcro, or even the, I think the other series, 1252 or 1250 Velcro intake gasket, that part is blocked. So your exhaust heat crossover is rendered unusable. And the manifold will run cooler, but of course you get nothing for free. You will have issues with warming up. So some of these gaskets are bought with an aluminum plate that hooks up right here that block the passage. Or if you run the 1262 Velcro right here, that's already blocked the way it is. Either way, so if you want a little bit more power out of your street manifold, let's say you ported the heads and you put a mild cam, block that heat riser, okay? You really don't care much about warming up issues, perhaps maybe except for cold winter time. But if you play it smartly, just guide along when you first fire up till you get a little bit of warm heat into the heads and the intake, then that sucker will run real good. So anyway, that is, so you have issues to help it along, spacer plate here and there, and that exhaust gasket, that intake gasket to block it. Now, Carburetor Recommendations 800, an 1850 600 CFM vacuum secondary. If you have mildly ported heads or ported, really excellent ported E7 or 350 Windsor heads, and you milled it a little bit and head gasket is thin, so you up the compression maybe 9.7, 9.75, then you could probably run a 600 double pumper or 650. Okay, granted that you have 355 gears in it, 373, so you got a little budget hot dog race car or street car out there. Okay, so that is just a little bit of help. Now, when you decide to go a step up, you have the Performer RPM. This is an air gap. This is one step above from the Performer to the Performer RPM. The RPM range there's idle to 5500. This is basically 1500 to 6500 RPM. Now, this is an air gap that I have here. It has isolated runners that air to go in and keep it cool. Remember what we talked about, the EGR? The exhaust passage to warm up the manifold. It is eliminated on this manifold. it's gone. All right, so this one runs much cooler than that, and it's got a bigger, slightly bigger runner, hence the higher RPM from 1500 to 6500, whereas the Performer manifold is idle to 55. There's another 1500 off the bottom, and instead of 5500, this is 6500 on the top end. Now, of course, if you use the wrong gasket, this thing on the RPM, well, you're going to introduce some heating. Even though it doesn't really protrude to the bottom of the manifold, it's still, the exhaust gas will touch this manifold and elevate the temperature. That's a no-no. So make sure you run the 1262 that I showed earlier without the center passage here and the block. Now, also, old school guys, and there's a lot of them out there, they run 160 thermostat on these doggone things. I've seen more wear on the cylinder bore, on the rings, when running the engine too cold, regardless if it's synthetic oil or what. The engine needs some kind of heat in order for that oil to function correctly, and the clearances are just about right as designed. Run a 180 thermostat, okay? And you will find that your engine will last a lot longer. And I see a lot of engines that have been running 160 or, excuse me, even without a thermostat, 100,000 miles, they're done. They're gone. Now, a lot of fuel injected 5.0s, HO, 200,000 miles, 180,000 miles, the bore is still good, especially when they take care of their oil. And sometimes you can hone it, put new rings in it, boom, they're out again. Amazing. With the oil, and then of course the fuel injection, when that engine is below 180 or 160, it stays on, you know, open loop, and it's basically on a rich mode, choke mode. When it hits about 175, 180, then it goes to closed loop, and then they pull back the fuel, they lean it out, and that's when your wear and tear is significantly reduced. And you pretty much the engine will last twice as long. Okay, so now back to this. So now you run a 180 thermostat on both of these manifolds, and one thing is that if you have the 9-to-1 still with ported heads, or maybe you got aluminum heads, GT40 or this AFR, whatever, okay, you can run a 650 double pumper. Granted that, again, you have 355, 373, 410s, or even an automatic trans with a whole shot converter or super whole shot with a C4 combined with the lower gears on the back. Then having that carburetor is a plus. Now, for some of you guys who don't want a double pumper because of gas issues, you can run a vacuum secondary, a 750. Okay, I think part number 3310. The 600 is 1850. The 750 Holley vacuum secondary runs, well, 750 runs a vacuum secondary, of course, and it's good, even with automatic transfer converter and some gears, that will work. Now, I have dyno tested these things where the center divider has been cut, and I will post the videos how we lost power on the dyno with this thing. Now, when you lose 8, 9, 10 horsepower in the dyno, yeah, you can debate it. Does that really matter on the racetrack, on the street? Because there's a margin of error there that might be debatable, and say, yeah, no, it really was better, even though it showed less on the dyno. Sure, I believe that. But when you're about 20, 30 horsepower, that's significant. I don't think you can mask that, according to the old saying, race the track, not the dyno. I think if it's that far away, by dropping this center divider, that's a no-no. If it hurt an engine, here's a dyno of at QMP. We did one The engine made about 589 horsepower, and the engine temperature was very cold, and we had a 2050 weight Valvoline oil to break it in. But we didn't realize until after the dyno session that our engine temperature is like 109. I bet you if we brought it up to 180, we would have hit 600 from 589. We would have hit that rather easily. Okay, and the oil was too thick, the engine was too cold. 589 with the wrong size header, that's not bad. Okay, and we did back-to-back tests with something modified as such as these one here. Took it out and threw another one in with the center divider milled, and I'll post the dyno sheets. Okay, here is the picture of the Performer RPM air gap. There's a stock one there, and streamlined that a bit, clean it up. Eventually I took it all the way down, cleaned the port walls here, and the next modification for this dyno experiment is we cut this down, all the way down, just like what a lot of the big block Chevy racers back then when they work on that I think it was a 454 manifold. I forget what the name of it was, and I think the C454 Edelbrock manifold, and a lot of big block Chevy racers cut it down like so, and then I see a lot of people doing that, so I figured let's try it with this Ford and see what happens. All right. Okay, here's the dyno pull on the Performer RPM, and not cutting down on the center divider, just streamlining it and match porting it to the head with some flash marks, cleaning the port up. Basically it's a mild porting on the intake manifold. You don't need to get too fancy. It made 7100 RPM, 555 from what I can see there. Okay, at 7100, and at 4700 it made 459 foot-pounds of torque. Pretty healthy, with an 11.35 compression on pump gas. So this is it, and I will look for the dyno sheet for the cut down divider, and I know it's a total loss. Okay, so I will look for that. As far as I know, it's 528 horsepower at 6900 compared to 555, and 448 at 4700 compared to 459 at 4700 with the unmodified Performer RPM air gap. So it's quite a loss. Quite a loss. All right. Okay, here we are. The readings as it comes after the divider wall was cut was 528.8. Okay, at 6900 RPM we didn't go any higher than that because it started dropping. Now at 4700 RPM it's 448 foot-pounds of torque compared to 459. So it dropped in torque, but the bigger loss was in horsepower. So if we're thinking that the divider wall being cut down would pick up the power, it did not. Testament to how good Edelbrock designed his manifolds, and I wouldn't really mess with it. I'll just add a spacer, an open spacer, or a 4-hole spacer, or a combination thereof of both. Okay, let's continue. Here we are, having a good time after the dyno test, even though it's kind of rushed. But anyway, the loss without the divider was 27 horsepower and lower by 200 RPM. It's amazing. I thought maybe the RPM would climb up, but it did not. And 11 foot-pounds of torque. Therefore, I suggest avoid doing what we have done. But anyway, it's a good check just to confirm. But 27 horsepower, you will see that at the racetrack. If it's a variation of about 8, 10, it's a yes or no. You know, drag racing, road racing, you might see some, you might not, but close to 30 horsepower loss is quite significant. Okay, so there we are. Let's continue on with the video. Big loss. Okay, so Edelbrock, that's a testament to Edelbrock. They haven't done their homework and they're not messing around. If they have that divider in there, leave it on. Okay, all you can do is match port it, and like here I sharpened it up a little bit, a dividing a wall, as opposed to this one here where it's still blunt. Okay, that one there's been reworked. So imagine if knocking the divider wall down netted us, I think, like 30 horsepower loss on a 600 horsepower small block. Imagine what they'll do on a 450, 500 horsepower street 3/4. This engine that we did was, it had 11.3 compression, and it was a road race motor. So my project there and my goal was torque off around the corners and not peak horsepower. And to have made 589, which we'll post here, and it hurt it. It probably worse with a regular 347 making under 500 horsepower. This is a 600 horsepower small block. Now, another option, if you don't want to run either one of these, oh, let me go back. The wind is a little bit different. It's kicked out here a little bit, and the runners are a little bit more longer in a sense. And then this dividing line right here, so I can reference both banks of the manifold. Theirs is isolated. Okay, it's not referencing off the other side like so. Okay, it's not a quarter of an inch lower. So the wind has that configuration. I feel that if there's any difference between the two, oh my God, probably not much, if any. All right. Now, another option for you, like myself, restoring my 68 Cougar. I have the original engine in there. I finally pulled it out. I had it since 1979, and I realized it was the original engine when it quit working one day, and I pulled the timing cover out, and it had the plastic gears. I go, oh, there's a factory engine still, still never been out. So it's a 68 XR7 Cougar. Now, I like to run those manifolds. I think they're good. But another option is, if you're always at the swap meet looking around, is this manifold. The Edelbrock F4B. Now, when you look at the Performer, look how high that is. The carb flange. It's below the valve cover, right? Then you put the RPM air gap. It's tilted a little bit here. It's a tad above the valve cover. The higher the carburetor is, it's got a higher port angle coming into the intake port, and all it will do is help your horsepower. Now, this classic F4B, this will be on my 308 or 310, 11.5 to 1 on my Cougar HO block, GT40 heads that are worked, big valves. Here's what you're looking at. It's tall, almost the same as a Performer RPM, but the port configuration is a little bit different. I'll put them side to side so I can show the difference between this manifold. This manifold, the F4B, if you look closely, some of them don't have the name Edelbrock, but right here it says Shelby. Okay? Those are even worth more than this. In fact, I had another one of these that I gave to my friend Patrick from Tahunga because he was restoring his Mach 1 for his daughter, and I had one of these and I said, take it. It's a gift because you're not going to find any one of those in a good shape like here. Now, with the Shelby manifold, it's even better, but I'll take it. There's an Edelbrock F4B, good enough. It's tall, it's impressive, it's more nostalgic from a 1960s look. When I run the I have a 715 Holly there. You can tell a 715 Holly or 735. The fuel line comes in on the left side, and then the transfer line from front to rear float bowl is on the passenger side. That is the period correct carburetor for this thing. So vacuum secondary. Looks like a 780, but it's a 715, 735. So using those two is a plus. Now, before I forget, remember what I told you about this gizmo right here? Okay, how that warms up the intake manifold for good streetability when it's cold. And I said, you get nothing for free. Here's the cost. And I did that hot tank this. The crossover is still active. Exhaust heat comes in from the head to the manifold, and look how it's burnt. Okay? If that is burnt, this manifold is cooking big time. When it first fired up, it's probably fine. But once you've been driving around a while, if you got 1200, 1300, or 1400 degrees Fahrenheit on that exhaust port, and it's trying to transfer itself on the manifold, that's why that doggone thing is cooked. Imagine what that would do to your power. Okay? A lot of heat soak. And one thing you got to realize is that there's such thing as what they call the Joule-Thompson effect. What is that? Well, when you look at, we've done it with a lot of our race cars out there, when we make a pass with a fuel injected car with a throttle body, as soon as it comes in on the pits, pop the hood, we put a fan right here, blowing on the manifold, trying to keep that intake cooler for the next run. The reason is a dry manifold, throttle body, fuel injection port right here runs hotter. Now, Joule-Thompson effect, if I can explain it, when you go to the baseball games or a football games really hot, you see some guy with a squirt bottle with a little fan going on battery power, and it squirts it, and he goes, that's cool. All right? You can put the fan on, but if you squirt water through a water bottle, through that little battery powered fan, it cools you down. That cooling sensation that you feel is the Joule-Thompson effect. When you put a mist of liquid, meaning water, through the airstream, it drops the temperature down 20, 25 degrees. Now, a carburetor fuel, the way it is, when you feel tap water or regular water you put in your hand on a hot day, it's also warm. But if you notice fuel, even on a hot day, you stick your hand in there, don't make sure it don't light up. It's cold. Especially if it's alcohol, a little bit of ethanol or whatever. Fuel is cold. So imagine the Venturi is dumping, below the Venturi it's dumping a mist of gasoline. It turns cold real quick. That's a Joule-Thompson effect. It immediately drops the temperature on the manifold. So On a hot day, let's say you're running around Willow Springs or the streets and it's 100, 105, that is what your engine is seeing if you're fuel injection. But if the other guy's got a carburetor, he's probably seeing 25, 20 degrees cooler. Is there going to be a difference there in performance? Of course there is. He's getting a denser fuel. He's getting more response. I mean, a carburetor will never beat a fuel injection on a distribution per cylinder to cylinder, no doubt about it. But a properly tuned carburetor can do a pretty darn good job, okay? Plus the Thomas Joule effect, or Joule-Thompson effect, will even cool it down, the better off you're gonna be. All right, so that's just something to think about. All right, so some people, when they have a mild combination, thinking, oh, I'll go to fuel injection, I'll make more power. Well, not really, okay? But anyway, still, like on the Performer manifold, playing around with spacers, whatever you choose. A lot of them would run an open spacer on the bottom and a 4-hole on top, like this. And what you're looking at is a shear plate to keep reverser from coming up on top of the carburetor. It's a pretty good trick, okay? They do that on tunnel ram, putting a shear plate on the top of the sheet metal intake or the tunnel ram. That always works. And just take note that the higher you put spacers on, it will tend to lean a little bit or get leaner while you're spacing that carburetor above the manifold, okay? Keep that in mind. So maybe when you put an inch and a quarter of an inch or half an inch, you might have to go one step up on your main and feel how it responds. Sometimes you might need to, especially with a vacuum secondary, go up to a Rio pump, a 50cc pump on the front. Because once you enlarge the plenum, you raise it up, you got more air volume there that needs a charge of fuel to keep it from backfiring due to a lean out condition. And the Rio pump, when I touch bases on the Holley carburetors, I'll show the Rio pump as opposed to standard accelerator pump. The Rio pump's 50cc, and it gives it a bigger shot of fuel when you mash the pedal. But case in point right now, you also change the squitter jets on the front of the carburetor. The bigger the jet is, the more initial shot, but the duration of the spray gets less. As opposed to a smaller squitter, okay? It doesn't deliver a big volume, but it gives it at a longer duration. So there's a tip off there that you gotta keep in balance and in check. Okay, so now I'll redo this thing and I'll give a little breakdown on the difference with these manifolds, okay, and what they've done with this. Okay, so let me get ready and we'll touch that subject next. Okay. Okay, we're closing out this video. What you're looking at is the Performer 289-302, and when you look at here from the top view or partial top view, is that the upper part of the manifold, because it's a dual plane, the inlet goes here and here, and same thing here on the back. It'll twist and go dump right here, and also on the other side. When you look at the distance between this port and that port, okay, it's pretty much equal. You have a bend right here, but you also have a bend right here and a straight port. So you see the same thing here. Okay, you have that distance and you have this distance. So they try to equalize everything, and the same thing underneath the second part of the lower port on the manifold. That is very effective. And what it does is it strikes for consistency in the port length. Therefore, when you get your peak torque, they all happen at the same time. All right, so and then there's a divider line right there, divider to the plenum. Just streamline that a bit, clean it up, and like I said earlier, the spacer, whatever, to have some tuning changes. if you like to get a little bit more power. But do not mess with the inside and everything. Everything looks good. Some of the aftermarket made in the other countries, they have some bad turns right about here. All right, so don't even waste your time. They look the same, but they're not made in USA. Okay, so that's there. Now we'll look at the Performer RPM. Now, what you see here is I streamlined that, cleaned it up. So when you're running an open spacer, you don't have any kind of a flow, separation, or turbulence right here. It's streamlined, not too sharp. You know, really a dull corner, but it's more streamlined than what it came in from the factory. But note what happened compared to the RPM. I think you could see that. Oh no, you can't. Anyway, what happened here is the inlet for the top part of the manifold is that long, and look at here. Close enough, isn't it? So they strive to get some kind of parity in the port length, and on the bottom part is the same thing. They try to equalize the flow again so that when it hits peak torque, horsepower, it's all going to be in a very, very good result. And it's a very impressive manifold. There's not much you could do here except flange the manifold there, all right, because they're tiny, and when you can see here, it's really small. Now notice the height, okay, and now we'll look at the classic Edelbrock F4B, or what we call the Shelby. Now, when you look at this thing here, it's kind of dark, huh? The manifold on the upper port or the upper plane, it's long, okay? But look where the secondary came in, short, all right? It goes a little bit past halfway. Still blunt right there. But the amazing part about this manifold, the fact that the RPM, this is unequal length. Now, what is the advantage? Is that bad? Well, not really. When you have two port lengths, okay? Now, this is a V8, so 4 are short, 4 are long. They will peak at 2 different RPMs. Basically, what this manifold is going to give you, it's pretty tall as well, okay? Is going to give you lower peak torque for the longer runners, right here and right there, and then a shorter port right here, a higher horsepower or at a higher peak torque. So you're going to have you're going to have a broader torque peaks, okay, or torque range, more across the board, but it's not necessarily going to make higher torque than the RPM, but it's going to be broader due to the fact of the unequal. Remember when they designed this thing, not much was really put to trying to get equal length runners so that your peak torque all hits at the same time, same RPM, and you have a very good peaky engine there. This one here is a broader torque range, so that is the quick difference between these two. Okay, so let me grab the this is today, and there it is, guys. That's the way it goes. 2 manifolds, 2 different eras, and you can see right there. This one kicks in right here, shorter, equal length. This one, short, longer. Two different design criterias, or what they're trying to do then. Okay, this is more advanced. So here you are. Thank you very much, guys. So please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep this going. And hopefully I'll do more street oriented as well as racing tech, and then we go from there. Thank you very much, everybody.